NAAMSA's SA Auto Week is the largest trade show of its kind in South Africa. This year, Cars.co.za was the official media partner of the event, and we set up this rather stylish podcast studio. Our very own Chiro de Siena and guest journalist from CNBC Africa, Fifi Peters, played hosts and over 3 days interviewed all the key figures in South Africa's motoring industry.
Over 3 years since his appointment as MD of Mitsubishi South Africa, Thato Magasa remains one of the youngest, if not the youngest, MDs in South Africa's automotive industry. Of course, he is joining us at Auto Week from the Cars.co.za podcast. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Thato.
Yeah, thank you guys for inviting me to your pod. I must admit, this pod looks really cool. Love
it is, right?
Yeah?
It is.
I've been looking at it all week, so yeah.
And finally you got in.
Yeah, I finally made it.
Just in terms of the facts about your age, not to be ageist, obviously in this time and society in which we are quite sensitive about certain elements of inclusion, dispel the facts for us. Are you still the youngest? Because, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of your colleagues so far this week, and I've seen a lot more grey hairs on them than I do you.
Yeah, so I don't think grey, but less hair on my head, maybe. But in terms of age, I don't know of anyone younger. I stand to be corrected. Sure. I don't really track and follow it. But I think at the point of appointment in Mitsubishi, I was certainly the youngest in the industry.
32 at the time, in 2021, from my understanding. Okay, not to give any more information about your age away, but I think that most people who have followed your story are quite inspired by what you have been able to achieve in such a short space of time. If we look at how sort of appointments and promotions have happened in the automotive industry in the past. But for those that don't know, just tell us a little bit about your story and your climb up the ranks.
Sure. So born in Soweto, in Protea. My formative years, younger years, spent in the East Rand of Johannesburg. Went to traditional primary school, high school, went to varsity, studied at University of Johannesburg, and then transitioned into automotive from there. And my plan was never to stay in automotive. I think I always saw there's somewhere you transition from and move into sort of the services field. But, you know, like many of us that are still stuck in the industry, you fall in love with the industry. And I fell in love with this industry in 2009. But not only because of what cars mean, but also the environment I think I worked in,
sure,
which is quite just conducive. So being in a importer type business, I got to do a lot of interesting things at a young age and a lot of challenging things in different parts of the automotive sector. So started basically in parts and sort of some general work, moved into fleeting, used vehicles, then new vehicles, then ops, and every single role that I undertook, it felt like I was working for a complete new company. And that is just the joy of automotive, is that you can do something completely different still within the same sector, and that keeps you exciting. It keeps it exciting. So
sure.
Stayed in automotive, started it, actually my first brand was Daihatsu that I worked with. That's where I cut my teeth, and then worked a little bit with the Chinese brands, ironically, in their first phase of introduction in South Africa before they left. And then moved on to Mitsubishi, which is probably where I worked for the most time, and then left and went to Renault South Africa.
Okay.
And then in Renault South Africa, I got involved in the retail, then looking after sales for dealer channel, and then eventually finding my way back to Mitsubishi as then the managing director.
So essentially, it's been quite the journey that you have taken, and the theme, as you know, of the conference this year is one of legacy and heritage. And I'm just wondering what the heritage and the legacy does look like of the automotive industry through your lens.
I think we've got a rich heritage of one, local manufacturing in South Africa. I think that's sort of quite a big and prominent thing, and just how many vehicles have been built in the local market, but also a rich heritage of iconic brands that have come into the country as well, not necessarily through manufacturing, but also being imported into the country. And South Africans have just loved these brands, and there's many iconic brands over time that have come in, and that's something that we will also celebrate in this week. The choice that consumers has, and how importers have pioneered technology advancements into country, have pioneered the advancements of new powertrains coming into South Africa. And that's quite important, So I think when we speak about the heritage of automotive, we speak about how we've been able to give access to mobility as well to many a South African that would not have had access to mobility if it had not been for the sector. Of course, if you speak to our friends on the MHCV side, they'll tell you a lot about just the history of trucking. And if you look at our landscape at the moment, we are so reliant on that industry for the movement of goods across the country, as we don't have quite the infrastructure in rail and other ways to move goods in South Africa. So rich heritage, I think, that we have as an industry overall, and also, of course, I think for us as Mitsubishi as well.
Of course, not ideal if we look at it from a sustainability point of view, or the number of trucks that we do have on the road. And it's something that was referenced by the president, who addressed yourselves as well as your stakeholders here regarding the situation of the ports and the roads, and improvements that he was hoping the new administration in South Africa, his new government, would be able to achieve. Any impact on Mitsubishi thus far?
There would always be an impact. I think when we look at it, we appreciate the need for a well-functioning rail infrastructure in the country, not only for the movement of people, but for the movement of cargo as well. So if you think about it, a lot of our vehicles move from Durban ports to Johannesburg still on road. That process still takes circa 7 days to happen, and you have risks of incidents on the roads, you have risks of strikes, and also you've got the degradation of the roads in South Africa, where a lot of commuters should be making their trips on holiday down to the coast, but now have to encounter trucks in that. So we are always a proponent of an improved railway structure, because also that will bring down costs of moving goods up and down between Johannesburg, where our businesses primarily are, 35% of them, and also the ports in which our vehicles come in.
And brings down
the cost of doing business. Right.
And brings down the cost for me of buying a car, and other motorists in South Africa as well.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to understand, your thoughts and your feeling about the car market. A lot of your colleagues, some are in the camp of we're about to turn the corner and the year ahead is going to look a lot better. Others are still trading with trepidation, just looking at the overhang from the COVID-19 pandemic, looking at the overhang from the cost of living crisis that most consumers find themselves in. What are your hopes and expectations for sales 2025 and beyond?
So if you look at just where we've come from as industry, I think there was a point in our industry around 05, 06 where we were talking about getting to 1 million car industry. And we were all hopeful and going, yes, 700,000 vehicles being sold, and we're quite excited about where the future looks like. And then sort of we had 08, 09, and then after that we had a sharp recovery in South Africa, and that was fundamentally due to, fortuitously as well, as we were hosting the Soccer World Cup, and there was a lot of positive things at play as well. And then we went into the 15, 16 years where we also started to experience a downturn in our market. And we've had a slow recovery up until 2019. And after that, we were impacted, of course, in 2020 by COVID, hitting about 360,000 vehicles sold. And since then, we've never actually quite recovered from those pre-COVID levels of, if I look at passenger cars and LCV, 510,000 vehicles sold. And we've never yet gotten there. Even in this year, our viewpoint is that we won't sort of be hitting those numbers. But if you look into the future, our view is that we definitely will recover. We just unfortunately have taken longer to recover out of this period. And we see a recovery potentially in 2025, 2026. Now, Now, the challenges in our recovery in our market has both been own goals on our side, but also structural changes in the world. And I often say to people that, we can't control what happens in Europe and global wars that can take place in geopolitical conflicts, which suddenly gives rise to global inflation. And that changes our entire world within an instant. We can't foresee what can happen in the Middle East, nor can we control it and how that could impact our markets. So there's many things taking place globally, and now you are seeing that you're finding excess production coming out of China, which is then being sort of redistributed to markets such as ours because there's tariffs in other regions. Those are things that we can't control much. What we can speak to is how can we make our market a bit bigger? And I think that's a conversation that we need to have more of, because if we are not able to get our market up to that 600,000 point, then we must appreciate that it's just going to be a race to the bottom for many brands in South Africa. And as we sit, you don't have this growing middle class base, you don't have a reduction in unemployment, and you don't have more people buying vehicles and coming into the sector as well. So I think that's some of the challenges that we're facing as a sector today.
So in making the market bigger, I mean, do you reckon that that's as a result of the economy actually growing at a faster pace in order to do so? Or are there some decisions that have to be taken internally by the industry to do so? I mean, in reference to the Chinese brands that you spoke about, that's a big theme here as well. How does the old compete with the new and remain relevant? Just your thoughts there.
So a few things I think to consider. I think one of the first things is that we have spoken quite a bit around the tax structures around vehicles and how just we are arguably overtaxed as consumers to buy vehicles with on average over plus 40% of vehicles being actual taxes. So I think that at a point in time needs to be reconfigured and considered to, is ad valorem in the way that we have it still correct? So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that, which is driving vehicle pricing. Another point is that when I speak to a market that's growing, it's definitely linked to GDP and having a wealthier society. Because once you have a wealthier society, you have growth and you have more people who can afford to buy vehicles. But to build a wealthier society requires many South Africans coming together and saying, we are going to focus on South Africa Inc., we are going to invest in South Africa Inc., and we're going to do everything we can to grow this economy, supported of course by your government and so on. Now, you would have heard me in my talk yesterday that I think what we need to start talking about is not necessarily the threat of Chinese brands coming into the country, but the low barriers of entry that we have in South Africa, in which brands are able to come in very easily in South Africa without making tangible investments into SA Inc. And when times get tough, can easily exit the country as well. That is damaging for the industry at large and also damaging for SA consumer in the end, because at the end of the day, when these brands leave, what do they leave behind? They don't support on the after sales side, and it's up to either the distributor that was left in the country to do that. And if they were in South Africa on their own, then you get quite concerned as to how that leaves the South African consumer in the end. I think there's many businesses that are invested in South Africa for the long run, that have been here for decades, and that's the heritage that we speak to. And what we say is that whilst we embrace competition, and we would like more competition in South Africa and like consumers to have choice, it must be done with the right intent.
Okay.
So if you look around here, today is, or this week rather, as a typical example, has been a week in which every single part of our conversations has been about how do we create a better automotive sector for the future? How do we support new energy vehicles into the future? How do we ensure that we can have cleaner cars or safer cars into the future as well? There's lots of conversations around the future of our industry here. But I'll ask you to look around how many new entrants are here actively playing their part as well. And these are the conversations that we're not having enough of around. It doesn't help to just come in and just want to sell to South Africans because, you can, because you've got low barriers to entry. But how many of us are coming in here and trying to actually grow this market? And that's, for me, it's quite important.
Okay. Essentially, you're speaking to a level playing field, which is Noted. But to the directive that you gave me, if we look around here, and of course, in looking around here, I know that one of your vehicles are on display just opposite the podcast booth that we are in right now. I am told we, of course, are looking at the Triton. You are looking at it because I'm looking at you, which is on display outside the podcast booth. What can South Africans expect?
This is a complete all-new Triton, complete all-new engine, suspension changes, and we're quite excited about what this can do for us. Increased towing capacity as well.
Sure.
Improved cooling system on the inside as well. Better cabin on the inside and load burn as well. And for the first time, when we are launching new Triton, we are looking actually to launch in different engines as well. Over time, which will be a phased approach, but I don't want to sort of give too many things away, otherwise you won't attend my launch.
I'm invited. I didn't even know I was invited, but happy to attend.
Yeah.
Just based on, you say that you have launched it in other markets and it has done exceptionally well. So I imagine that you've got a form of benchmark or even expectation as to how it's going to do here in South Africa. I know that execs such as yourself don't like to be drawn on targets in terms of sales of new models, but are you willing to share?
I can give you maybe just a broad sense. I think if you look at the bakkie market in South Africa, it's cutthroat. And it's one part of the market where it's very difficult to enter and to penetrate. A lot of the brands that have done well, barring Ford, in the local market are actually Japanese brands.
Sure.
Just this pedigree of durability, reliability that most of these brands have. And it's something that we boast of in abundance, and we're quite confident that our bakkie can actually walk the talk and not just talk the talk as well.
Okay.
So if you're looking at sort of where we're seeing our growth coming from in the future, it's definitely in the bakkie market. That's one of the areas in which we're focusing to see us grow into. And we probably want to see our bakkies in the end once the full portfolio is launched, because we want to launch in 3 phases, with this being the first phase. We probably want to see this at about 40% of our product mix.
Okay, got you.
That's the only number I can share.
We'll take it. Like I said, I have realized that sharing of numbers is quite a sensitive issue in your industry, so we'll take it and we'll monitor the developments, of course, after the launch.
Sure.
Talking about inclusion and your inclusion in the alliance with Renault and Nissan, how has it manifested here in South Africa?
So the alliance, I think, overall has been good. It started, of course, with almost volume above all else sort of approach in the days of Cars.co.za. And then in more recent years, it's followed a leader-follower approach, whereby you all sort of go into your respective areas of expertise and drive that quite hard, and the rest of the other 2 brands within the alliance can then come in and follow if there's something that can speak to their markets. But on the Mitsubishi front, Mitsubishi has focused in the main on its own platforms, which has helped us set ourselves apart within the global alliance quite well. So if you look at our Pajero Sport Triton platform, that was our platform that we developed our cars on, and that you'd only find probably the 2 vehicles being Triton and Pajero Sport being developed on that platform.
Okay.
Of course, we know that new Triton is a similar platform. I think that will be used in Nissan Navara going forward. But if you look at the rest of our SUV ranges, we've got our Expander, which was a long vehicle we launched in 2021, which is a platform that's in Indonesia, and that platform has given rise to the SUV you see just outside here, which is our Outlander Sport that's being launched, and another vehicle that will be launched within a year or 2's time as well, an SUV as well, which is our own platform. Where we have shared platforms within the alliance has been within our CMF-CD platform, which is the same platform that Nissan X-Trail and Outlander use, and that has given us a new segment in which we can compete in on a South African perspective, but not only in South Africa, globally as well, where we've seen that in North America especially, that platform has done quite well for us in terms of how Outlander has taken off in that market. So I think we are able to draw and share across common platforms within the alliance itself, but also keep our DNA and have our own sort of way in which we look at the world.
Just lastly, I mean, you did make reference of the Pajero. I have been asked to ask if the return is on the cards here in South Africa. And just by your reference of it, can I infer that perhaps that's a yes?
I think there's an exciting future for our large SUV range.
Okay.
And just watch the space. I think it's
quite a
exciting.
Diplomatic way. He's not saying yes, but he's not saying no. Thato, thanks so much for joining us today. And of course, we will be watching the space, as you have said, and certainly moving with you as you move along in your product development and your launches.
Thank you for having me here.
Think of a car, any car. Yes, Cars.co.za. Let's find what moves you.